dear CYI colleagues, I would say mostly KRC colleagues, for attending this colloquium. Thank you, Professor Papanikolas, for attending the colloquium. It's my pleasure to introduce the second recruited faculty providing a colloquium this year. The first was Professor Philippe Sies, Institute Professor. He gave a very nice colloquium about a month ago. We have now Stratos, and of course we have two others. At some point we will be happy to hear as well, Professor Marenko and Professor Tuyayokina. So let me introduce rapidly Stratos. Stratos is a faculty member at KRC. He has been recruited in January 2021. He was before a research associate at the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry in Mainz, working with Professor Jost Leffeld, and he had before a PhD in geoscience from the Goethe University of Frankfurt in Germany, so many years in Germany. And but before he had a master in environmental physics and a BSc in physics from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. So his focus is what you will hear today, is the role of volatile organic compounds in the Earth systems. This is a very important component of our atmosphere, and he will tell us more. And he has led a lot of research so far on biogenic volatile organic compounds. You will know more what the meaning behind, from both terrestrial vegetations and soils. And he has developed instrumentation for the measurement of fluorofluorocarbons, CFC, in the free troposphere, and emission of methane hydrocarbons, sources and sinks, applying interdisciplinary approaches in order to evaluate the atmospheric impacts of anthropogenic and biogenic emissions in our atmosphere. Stratos has participated and participates currently and coordinates projects at the Cyprus Institute, international projects. Is our scientific PI for the Norwegian funds ACCEPT project. Is our scientific PI for the Horizon 2020 Atmo Access project that provides transnational access to our European research infrastructure of USRL and Cairo. He's the author of more than 30 papers, several of which are in high-impact journals like Science, Nature Communications, and Global Change Biology. And with this, I would like to give you the floor, Stratos.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zan, for the introduction. And I have to say that I'm particularly excited today to see you all here. It's the first presentation I'm giving since the pandemic. And since I'm in Cyprus a bit more than a year, it's a nice opportunity to present you my work. That it's on reactive trace gases, which is an element that was missing at the Cyprus Institute and generally in Cyprus, actually. So what are these reactive trace gases? I guess that all of you know that the air that we breathe is mainly composed of nitrogen and oxygen. Now, the remaining gases are termed as trace gases, and they are having very small mixing ratios in the atmosphere at the range of parts per million to parts per trillion. So you can, I'm sorry, I'm getting a handle of this. So you can see that the mixing ratios that we are measuring, like 1 ppt, is this percent in the atmosphere. Now, out of all these reactive trace gases, there is a class of compounds that are termed volatile organic compounds. So, as the name indicates, there are some carbon-containing compounds that are having high vapor pressure, which means that they are in the gaseous phase in the ecosystem, in the air. So, to have you a bit related with the volatile organic compounds is more or less what you are smelling in your everyday lives. An example here is the terpenes. So, when you go to a forest, the smells that you are getting is more or less terpenes, monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes and so on. And this is another example of here that you can see the perfume Chanel No. 5 is having 19 ingredients. Most of them are monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes. So I guess that now you are relating a bit more to what the VOCs are. So the primary emission source is vegetation by more or less 90%, and then we have anthropogenic sources. Regarding vegetation, the VOCs are emitted by trees, shrubs, crops, And the main class that we will be hearing a lot today is the class of terpenes. On the other side, we have the anthropogenic VOCs that are emitted mainly by industrial activities and biomass burning. And the class that we will be interested in there is the light hydrocarbons, such as alkanes, alkenes, and aromatics. So why do plants emit these VOCs? So we have to go a bit more back, a step back, and see the ecological importance of these VOCs. They are emitted from trees mainly to protect from oxidative stress or from high temperatures. They are also emitted as a function for plant reproduction. So, for example, this flower is emitting a specific blend of VOCs, and then the pollinator is understanding that there is a flower over there and it's going. Also for plant defense. For example, when the herbivores, when you have a caterpillar eating a leaf, then the tree is understanding this and emits a different blend of VOCs that attracts the insects that will eat the caterpillar. And in general, they are used for plant-to-plant communication. So, long story short, the biogenic VOCs are the doctor, the arsenal, and the language that the ecosystems are using. So now what's happening when they are emitted in the atmosphere? These species undergo atmospheric oxidation, so they react in the atmosphere with atmospheric radicals, and their products contribute to a mechanism that is giving pictures like this. I mean, I don't know if the resolution is good enough, but what you can see, for example, here at Mountain Troodos is this blue haze sometimes. And this is a phenomenon that we see where we have new particles formed. And when we have the formation of these particles, then the atmospheric vapors are condensing into them, and then we have the formation of clouds, or more or less the change of the properties of the clouds. So you understand that this is a very important natural mechanism. However, we are living in urbanized environments, and as you can see here from a photo of Los Angeles, the VOCs, when they are emitted and then they react with nitrogen oxides in the presence of light, they are forming ozone. And this ozone creates this photochemical smog, and it's extremely dangerous for plants and also for our health, actually, in larger concentrations. The importance of volatile organic compounds extends really in many fields of science. And here I'm just having some examples, for example, in medicine. And actually, just 2 weeks ago, the FDA in the US approved the first diagnostic tests. So what's happening is that our body the metabolic activity of our body is producing VOCs that can be used to monitor our health status. So what I'm showing down here with this spectrum here is different masses that can be actually a chemical fingerprint of the VOCs that emits a person that is tested positive in the virus. Another important part of VOCs is the human emotions. And actually, I was lucky enough to be part of a team that was awarded the IG Nobel Prize for Chemistry just last year for our work inside a cinema. So what we did is that we have been to a cinema, but instead of watching the movies, we have been at the ventilation system and we installed our instrumentation. We monitored more than 100 movies over there, and an example can be seen here with the Hunger Games. So you can see that 4 different days we were measuring CO2, and for example here we have 2 volatile organic compounds such as isoprene and acetone, and you can see that all of these days the pattern looks very similar. However, we don't measure only 2 or 3 VOCs, we're measuring hundreds of them. So in order to process the data, we collaborated with the University of Mainz, that they applied machine learning tools. And by classifying the individual scenes to action, romance, drama, and so on, we found that actually the VOC emission blend that we are giving with our emotion is related to what we are seeing. And actually, the VOCs can be also used as a tool for classifying the film categories. So I hope that that was a brief introduction to give you an idea of what are VOCs. Of course, here we are at the Climate and Atmosphere Research Center, And in the following, I will show you what are the research activities that we are doing here, or what I have done, and we are transferring the knowledge here. The first part will be on biogenic VOCs, and especially on the environmental drivers. There are really several environmental drivers that can affect the emissions, but the temperature is the most important. And actually what we are using in the models, the temperature equation is the most significant in simulating the emissions from vegetation. And after all, we are in a region that we are expecting to have higher and higher temperatures and extremes over the next years. So it's very important to see how plants react in terms of land-atmosphere interactions and what are the feedback of these emissions to the atmosphere. So how do we measure these VOC emissions? Usually a typical approach is that we are enclosing leaves, branches, or even whole plants, and then we are measuring the temperature and the emission of biogenic VOCs with our instrumentation. What we see then is that these emissions are exponentially increased with temperature. And this is the equation that describes the emissions from a vegetation. I know that many of you may not really understand this, even this simple mathematics, but this beta here, it's actually defining the slope of this exponent. Strange enough, this beta, so this temperature dependency, this how sensitive are the trees in their emissions, is stable for all ecosystems and all environmental conditions. So what we did, and it's a big part of my work here as well, is that we make a meta-analysis study and we collected all available observations of this temperature dependency, this beta factor, that were distributed as in the map that I'm showing here. What we saw is that the temperature sensitivity is not stable, of course, but it's actually higher than previously thought by around 30%. And this is becoming a bit more significant here in the broadleaf trees. So here you can see the different plant functional types that are explained in this table here. And you can see that especially for the broadleaf evergreen tropical trees that are having also that are covering a big area of our planet, this temperature sensitivity is much more pronounced than we were expecting. So what does this mean? In order to evaluate the importance of this revision here, we ran the emission model coupled with an atmospheric chemistry model. And what we saw is that we have increased oxidative capacity of the atmosphere, which means that actually now we are modeling more OH, bridging a bit the gap between measurements and simulations, that all simulations were always underestimating the emissions. And we also have impacts in the production of aerosols, as I explained before, with direct impacts, of course, in the radiative forcing. So the conclusion here is that the atmospheric chemistry is highly sensitive to terpene emissions that are highly sensitive to temperature, and we have several uncertainties because we don't consider other environmental drivers. And it's not only that. Besides of how understanding the emissions from trees, we have also new sources appearing all the time, and these are also affecting these land-atmosphere interactions. So we have been to the Amazonian Tall Tower Observatory, that you can see these very beautiful photos over there, which is actually the largest construction in Latin America. And I could make a separate presentation of what we see in the air above the Amazon, but here I would like to focus a bit on the biggest surprise that we saw over there, and this comes from the soils. We were not really expecting that because, as you can see in this photo, the soils in the Amazon are mainly consisting of clay, and there is only very thin organic matter over there. So what we did is that we collected soil samples, and we brought them to the laboratory, that we set it up in Manaus, and we applied more or less a similar method. Like we enclosed them in a chamber, we put the soil in there, and the concept was the following. We were simulating a rain event, so we were wetting the soils at 100% water-filled pore space, so let's say soil moisture, and then we allowed them to dry out over the course of some days. So what we see here is that after a couple of days, several of these VOCs start to display these optimum-shaped patterns, which was a first indication for microbes. So, and actually, they were correlated with the 16S RNA transcript abundance, which indicates that these were microbes. And here, I could also say a lot, so I'm welcoming some questions at the end of the talk. And what we did is that we validated these measurements in the field, we formulated them in mathematical equation, and then we simulated the emissions. And what we saw is that the bacteria emissions from the soil of this class of terpenes, the sesquiterpenes, which is actually the most reactive class of biogenic VOCs, can be as strong as the emissions from the canopy, which was a big surprise. And seeing a bit the chemistry in the background, these emissions from the bacteria are actually regulating the ozone gradients inside the Amazonian forest. Around that time, another source came out in the light, which was coming from some colleagues in New York. So at the beginning, I showed you that a perfume is containing a lot of VOCs. So actually, it's not only your perfumes, it's your shampoo, your hairspray, and the skin lotion. And this is a significant amount of, let's say, biogenic VOCs that inside the cities are reacting with nitrogen oxides, and it's further enhancing the ozone production in the cities. So here in Cyprus, we would like to investigate all this, focusing more in agricultural ecosystems. And why is that? So as I showed you in my meta-analysis study, I have identified that there is no research actually on crops on how they behave in temperature changes. And this is quite important. So we would like to go to a vastly understudied vegetation type in a region that will have increased temperatures and increased ozone. And at the end, we would like to make some comprehensive research in the soil, plant, atmosphere, and even crop yield interface. So let's catch our breath a bit and see what we learned from the first part and what I would like you to take home with you. So the important biogenic VOCs are called terpenes. And this is more or less the forest smell or your perfume smell. The VOCs are the doctor, the arsenal, and the language of the ecosystems. And once they are released in the atmosphere, they are undergoing oxidation processes, resulting in the formation of ozone, of aerosol, but also having implication in the lifetime of greenhouse gases, such as methane and CO2. Eventually, the climate warming will introduce further volatile organic compounds that will add on to the climate warming. And this is not simulated in the models, and actually current models face challenges in describing the emissions, as we saw, for example, with the temperature sensitivity. New sources come into light, such as soils, cosmetics, and actually just a couple of weeks ago, there was a couple of articles showing increased monoterpene emissions from bark or from mosses and lichens. But what we would like to do here is we would like to investigate the agricultural ecosystems that are highly understudied, starting from soil to the crop and then seeing what's happening to the atmosphere. So now we go to the second part of the presentation, which is maybe a bit more relevant in terms of pollution in this region, where I will start with some pilot observations, because anthropogenic VOCs in Middle East have not been measured until this campaign, let's say, because there are some political reasons and the research regarding anthropogenic VOCs is left behind. So back in 2017, we had a campaign that it was called ACABA, and actually the Cyprus Institute also participated in this campaign, and this is why we have this beautiful picture from the drones of USRL. And during this campaign, we sailed from France all the way to Kuwait and back. So as you can understand, along the way, we met completely different air masses, ranging from the very clean marine that we saw in the Arabian Sea to the very polluted air masses that we observed inside the Arabian Gulf. In these plots here, I have some timelines, some exemplary timelines of the lightest alkanes, like ethane and propane. And you can recognize easily that inside the Arabian Gulf, we measured the highest concentrations, some record high for our instrument, which was actually kind of expected. What was not expected was to have very high concentrations over the northern part of Red Sea. So what we did is that we compared our measurements with some model simulations that resembled the track that we followed. And what we saw is that over the Red Sea, while in general the model was doing quite well over around the Arabian Peninsula, over the Red Sea we found a strong underprediction of hydrocarbons. Like ethane was underestimated by a factor of 20 sometimes, and propane by a factor of 40. So, long story short, we identified the source of these emissions, and this source was the Red Sea deep water. And actually, the emissions are that strong that can even compare with the emissions of entire countries with increased oil and gas activity in the Middle East. What we cannot say so far is where these emissions come from. It could be that they are coming from seepage, so more or less leaks in the floor, because we are in a place where the tectonic plates are colliding, and this allows a lot of gases to go out. It could be that there are some brine pools, which means like some salt lakes in the bottom of the Red Sea that are very rich in hydrocarbons. Or most likely, there were leaks from the oil rigs from the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, where these gases were going in the bottom of the Red Sea and then advecting at the place that we saw them. Here I have to clarify a significant misconception. Like, these light hydrocarbons are not that bad. They are becoming bad when they are reacting with anthropogenic pollution, nitrogen oxides. And this is what is projected to happen for the future. So we're expecting marine traffic to significantly increase in the next years, and that would mean exponential increases at some point of the ozone and deterioration of the local air quality. Now, having this in mind, what we are going to do in KRC is that we are going to assess the air quality in Middle East mainly through campaigns. And here I'm having some examples of some campaigns, starting with Cairo, where Aliki Christodoulou was there a couple of years ago, and she was measuring volatile organic compounds. So what do we see here in this plot is the results of an analysis that is called source apportionment. So more or less what this technique is doing is that it's identifying the chemical signature of different sources that are termed here as factor 1, 2, 3. So Aliki saw 3 different sources that are dominating in Cairo. The first one was, as expected, the traffic emissions. The second one was influence from biogenic emissions that come from the Delta Nile. And third, she identified some emissions from waste burning, and particularly from polystyrene. And this is very important, because if you see like the species, like the higher aromatic VOCs are quite dangerous for our health, and especially in high concentrations. Some of these are just styrene, or xylenes, and benzene, and toluene, and so on. So in the second campaign, and in the first that I am here at the Institute, we took our brand new instrumentation, thanks to MCare, and Max went to Ioannina, where we had a campaign to investigate residential combustion. So Ioannina is a quite unique case, because the topography allows all the pollutants to stay low in the ground, and the residents over there are burning a lot of coal as a tradition or as a lack of other alternative energy sources. So this is creating the ideal conditions for us to investigate atmospheric chemistry as they are doing in a chamber, for example. Of course, we still have preliminary data for this study, but if you see if we see the timelines, and we see especially what was happening around the new years of 2022, we identified concentrations that are actually higher than has been reported in polluted megacities such as Delhi, Tokyo, London, and so on. So that would be a very nice study to investigate the chemistry inside there. The next campaign I would like to refer is the one in Doha, Qatar, that will take place next year, so I don't have any results to show. But there would be an ideal combination for our institute to investigate both dust pollution and photochemistry, which is actually the smoke that I explained before. So what we did is that we have already been in Doha with our colleagues, and we identified 2 stations that are downwind the emissions, and that will give us the opportunity to both evaluate the background concentrations, but also the emissions that the Doha city is giving. So, last and after the trip around the world, we are going to our home, to Cyprus, and here I would like to show what we are doing here locally. So, thanks to MCare, we have established the Cyprus Atmospheric Observatory, which is 4 different stations distributed across Cyprus, and they are measuring background concentrations, either regional, urban, or even free troposphere on our latest station at Troodos. And this is quite nice, because here in Cyprus we are at the border of 3 continents, but at the border of different pollution regimes. So we have pollution from Western Europe or from Eastern Europe, and of course from Middle East and the oil and gas activities. So starting with the Colloquium, which is actually a station that is part of the integrated carbon observation system. We did the first observations there in my first year as postdoc, actually, back in 2014. And what we saw is that their masses were coming from Europe. So we were measuring aged pollution that comes from Europe. And we saw very low concentrations of anthropogenic VOCs, but very high concentrations of ozone. And that was a clear indication that we are dealing with oxidized masses and the transported ozone pollution to Cyprus. This is becoming a bit more evident if we compare these results with the measurements that we took this summer in the same region, where we saw that inside Nicosia we have higher amount of alkanes and lower ozone, adding to the hypothesis that the most ozone concentrations that Cyprus is having are attributed to transported pollution. So in the next campaign, because our stations were not serving this purpose, but we employed our mobile laboratory. So what we wanted to see is what's happening with this rich oil and gas pollution, what reaches to Cyprus, and what do we see over there. So we took our mobile station here, and we brought it at the very southeast part of Cyprus, where you can see from the picture as well, we were having uninfluenced air masses over there. And sometimes VOCs, like as a quick play, we can simply use the ratios to understand the chemical signature. And here you can see that we did get a chemical signature of oil and gas when we are looking at the pentane isomers, which is very different of what we saw inside Nicosia, which indicates 2 different sources. Last but not least, we have the cow station at Agia Marina Xyliatou, and again I'm showing this photo here that we have new particles forming there, and actually this station is of global interest and part of the ACTRIS network, because this phenomenon here, the formation of new particles, occurs 200 days per year. And this is making it particularly important, and for us and for our colleagues and collaborations to come and perform measurements at Agia Marina Xyliatou. So summarizing a bit on the anthropogenic VOCs, the important class is the light hydrocarbons, alkanes, alkenes, and aromatics. We have multiple sources. Currently, actually, in our emission inventories, there are, I think, 15. And some of these anthropogenic VOCs, especially the high aromatic ones, are quite significant, have significant implications for our health. Once they are released, they are reacting with nitrogen oxides from traffic, and they are forming ozone. This sentence remains the same. Current models face challenges in describing the emissions with significant atmospheric feedbacks, and this is why we are here. And as KRC, we would like to address the atmospheric pollution in the Middle East with intense field campaigns, but also locally having our cow stations that can be used to observe oxidative air masses from across Europe and the Middle East. So with that, I would like to summarize. We're having emissions of volatile organic compounds for really multiple sources. We try to understand them. We try to understand the atmospheric processes, what's happening when they are released. And this is becoming more and more relevant because I don't know how many of you are aware, but after 12,000 years, more or less, we have entered a different era. We are not anymore in Holocene, we are in the Anthropocene, where temperature increases are very radical, and this will affect the vegetation, this will affect the atmospheric chemistry and oxidation processes, and we hope that we will contribute to the research globally through Cyprus. And with that, I would like to acknowledge the MKR funding, because this is the reason that we are here and we have the possibility to do all this cool research. And of course, you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stanos, for this very, very nice talk. Really enjoyed. I would like to open the floor for a few questions from the audience. And please don't feel shy, there is a lot of people who are knowing about it. Panos, you are the first.
Thank you very much for this enjoyable talk. Also, it showed a very promising research direction of KRC with rich topics. And actually, I think it was also a model presentation of a colloquium. I would use it as a model because it has exactly the depth and the richness, but also the perception items and the visualization for everyone. So I think this is a great colloquium. So my question is relating to one of the VOC on agriculture. So these are the biogenic, let's say, emissions. So can you elaborate a bit more on the context, why to focus on agriculture in Cyprus, I guess? So we want to quantify the contribution from the emissions from agriculture to what, ozone pollution?
There are several aspects, actually. If we go a bit back, like just to have a related slide. So, yeah. There are really several reasons to deal with agriculture. One of the reasons is that these emissions, like in global scale, are quite significant. However, the temperature response of these emissions, as I mentioned before with the example of how the temperature is working, as I said, I did not identify any study on crops. And this is quite interesting because we would like to see how crops change. And we are in an environment that we have high temperatures, we have high extremes, and what I would like to use is I would like to use VOCs as markers of agricultural ecosystem health. And then, of course, we can collaborate, and we will collaborate with the Environmental Prediction Department to see how well we can understand these emissions, revise these emissions locally and even globally, and then see the implications that we have in atmospheric chemistry in global scale.
Thanks.
I have a question, Lee. It's a typical question I give, so it's not just for your presentation. If I had to bet 10 million euro on your VOC activity, imagine I have a second MKR and it's an MKR on VOCs.
Would be nice.
Okay, I give you 10 million euro Stratos, but I want to have something very impactful, of course. So how you will be using this 10 million?
I will be betting my money in agriculture, I have to say. So how I will be using this 10 million, I will take a couple of millions for instrumentation, a couple of millions for personnel. And what I would like to do then, I would like to build a greenhouse in the fields that KRC that the Cyprus Institute has in Oruda field station, and then try to combine controlled condition experiments parallel with what's happening outside in the field.
Okay, this is the science part.
That's the
And
science
what will be
part.
the impact?
The impact and the end product, I would promise to have a product that can use VOCs as a markers of ecosystem health. We also have the USRL here and the drones. So if we identify, I mean, we saw starting from our health and all the source apportionment studies, everything is with chemical signatures. So I would like to make the research, identify the chemical signatures of crop-related activities, such as what is the farming, what is the diseases, and then implement them in drone-related activities. So more or less, I am envisioning that we can fly a drone above agricultural fields and then understand which part is infested and so on. Or then we can even make predictions of measuring the VOCs at primitive stages. Maybe there is a link with the eventual crop yield. And
You will work with who for that?
I would work with the Agricultural Research Institute nearby, and particularly with Michalis Somiro, that we already start discussing in this direction. Thank you.
Questions?
You showed that with temperature you get exponential increase.
Mm-hmm.
And also you showed, if I understand correctly, that these emissions influence nucleation in clouds. Is this a stabilizing force or destabilizing the...
Okay, yes, I kept it as simple as possible. So there are two different... Yes. No, but it's a very nice question, actually, because one of the key points and that I would have also applied here is the turn points. So, no, it is stabilizing. And this is relating with how these VOCs are produced. There are two different types. There are the VOCs that are stored in the leaf, and then they are emitted, and they can be emitted until the storage pools are open. And then there are also the in situ production of VOCs, which is also a function of light. So in the second case, it's increasing exponentially, but then at some point it's breaking down. And this breakdown point is another resilience, let's say, turnover point that we are typically trying to understand for individual ecosystems and plants. So it was a successful question, but yeah, a bit more deep.
Yes.
Strada, thank you very much for this concise and very clear, to the extent that I can understand presentation. I have again a question that is related to this. Perhaps it's a silly question. Now, you show that because of climate change, we have higher temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
We also get higher biogenic VOC emissions,
Mm-hmm.
which means that there is more mass of VOCs into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And because, of course, of mass balance, something is lost from the plants or from the crops. So what happens to the crop in this case? I mean, there is higher emission. So there is some mass going to the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. What's happening?
What's happening to the plant?
Nothing. It's a function, like, let's say, as I mentioned the term thermotolerance. So let's say, for example, ourselves, when it's hot, we're sweating. What's happening to our bodies? Nothing. We sweat, and then our body is producing new water or is taking new water by drinking, the plants by the roots. So it's refreshing its ability to sweat, let's say. If we can make an example of sweating and emitting VOCs, let's say.
That it would need some more input in order to stay at the same.
The input is a lot. So VOCs are produced by converting carbon dioxide. And the emissions of VOCs and the abundance of VOCs is in parts per billion, or parts, while CO2 is orders of magnitude higher. So there would never be a problem in terms of finding the source to synthesize the VOCs.
Thank you. Last question? If not, I would like really to thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And before you leave, and because before also our people watching us online, leave, let me remind you of our next lectures and our next colloquia. First of all, in 2 weeks' time, we have the annual Uber-Korean lecture, which takes place on Thursday, the 19th, but at 7:30 in the evening at our open-air amphitheater. And we will be hosting a very distinguished lecturer, Professor Jean-Philippe Bouchot. And of course, everybody watching us and everybody here is very warmly invited and encouraged to attend. And then on the 2nd of June at 4 p.m., we have the usual continuation of our colloquia series with Assistant Professor Efi Nikita from Star-C. And on the 30th of June, we will have a visiting professor from Technion in Israel from the Faculty of Architecture. And on the 14th of July, we will have Thomas Anderson, a renowned academic and also practitioner on innovation. And we will most probably have another visitor on the 16th of June, but we will let you know. But keep in mind the 19th of May, the Korean lecture, the 2nd of June, and stay tuned for the next lectures. Thank you very much.